Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Forks, where one of your pieces attacks two or more of your opponent's pieces simultaneously, are a great tactic in chess. As we can only usually move one piece per turn, making two or more threats with a single move can mean that we potentially force the opponent to making a concession, for instance, losing a piece. I played this game as a rapid 10-minute plus 5-second bonus game on Lichess, which is what I sometimes do when I don't have time to play my preferred format of 30-minute rapid on chess.com. Unexpectedly, my opponent was likely much lower rated than me, in fact a complete novice. This game thus gives many examples of different types of forks. I think there may have been 6 forks, and also some pins and a skewer. This is also an example of the sort of mistakes that beginner players make, which is useful for reflection. Please enjoy! All right, let's start with a very quick review. So even though I play this game on Lichess, I usually analyze my games on the chess.com analytic engine because I much prefer it. And as you can see, the opponent was rated 1500, which I think is actually the default rating actually on Lichess. And when I sort of looked at this individual's profile afterwards, I think this might have actually been their first game in the format. So who knows where they're rated? Probably quite a bit lower. Now on Lichess, I'm rated at 1577. I played with almost 90% accuracy, and you can see right after the opening, the opponent didn't do very well. And it's interesting, according to the engine, that they had so few inaccuracies. But when you actually look at the game, I wonder whether or not that's a quirk on how the algorithm works when one player is quite a bit more highly rated than the other. Now let's move straight on to the analysis now, because I think it's quite an interesting game. So I played this game using the black pieces. My opponent had white, and just as a reminder, this is a much more rapid game than what I normally play. So it's 10 minutes with a 5-second bonus with each move. The opponent plays with the queen pawn, d4, very good move. I respond with d5, and they play c4, so the queen's gambit. And later on in the game, when I sort of realized that the opponent was a complete beginner, for a moment, I sort of had some anxiety. I was sort of wondering whether or not I was bullying like a 6 or 7-year-old in a game of online chess. But then I sort of reminded myself, well, no child deliberately plays the queen's gambit, and it's much more likely that this is a sort of interested sort of adult or older player inspired by the queen's gambit on Netflix, just like me, and so playing the queen's gambit. So I felt perhaps moderately confident that I was playing an adult rather than a very young person. Now against the queen's gambit, I usually play the Slav defense, which is now with c6. Now in this game, at this point, this is all fairly normal. And then my opponent played sort of the pawn captures pawn. I thought, oh, that's unusual. Usually with queen's gambit, with Slav defense, we sort of develop around this, and we don't go through the exchange variation, because if you're going to play the exchange variation, you kind of might as well just play e4, e5, I think. But exchange variation it is. They now also develop as knight c3, which is fine. I developed knight f6, so also very normal at the moment. They developed their other knight. I developed e6 as an extra defender on my d5 pawn. And here, this gave me pause. I actually had to think about this move for a while. So b4, and I thought, isn't that straight out hanging? And I was wondering, is this some sort of gambit that I'm not familiar with? Looked at it for a while, and I thought, I don't think that's a gambit. I think that's just a straight out blunder, isn't it? So I thought, look, just capture. Don't think about it too hard. And then my opponent played a3, so attacking the bishop. And this is where I knew, okay, they must in fact be a beginner. So didn't see the diagonal, the diagonal they didn't see, and now with the bishop there, so a one move attack, and then not seeing, of course, I can capture that knight, and capturing that knight comes with a fork. So simultaneous attack on bishop, sorry, on the king and the rook, and this is just good for me. The only thing that the opponent can do, obviously they can't move the king out of the way, is block with one of these pieces. The most logical piece to block with is the bishop. It's still, still a terrible position to be forced into. -8. They play the bishop. That's best because potentially you could sort of attack and you don't sort of block in your other pieces. But now, of course, I capture the rook and they capture back. So -8 basically in my advantage, to my advantage. So here I just short castles. Let's move the king out of the center. The opponent plays knight g5, which seems decent enough, but that allows me to just push that straight back with h6. I now develop my other knight, c6, and at this point I'm thinking of potential ways of, how can I sort of end this, liquidate the pieces. I'm way ahead on development now. Opponent plays bishop b4, and obviously I could just straight up capture that. I'm not sure I really wanted to do that, so I decided instead to move my rook to e8 so that I could potentially push the center pawns. They play e3, which was good. I push my center pawn, so still pretty good for me. And now, there are sort of two defenders, and sort of belatedly I noticed the queen was there as well, so it doesn't entirely work. They capture, which comes with a threat. However, I can now bring an extra attacker. And one of the strategies is you generally need one more attacker than defender. So now I've got 1, 2, 3. Opponent only has 1 and 2, so this works for me. Now, before that, I decided to just kick that bishop because I thought they were going to move. So there we go. And now I capture. And so this is now another fork of the knight and bishop. Yeah, I thought it might have been better for them to just move one of their pieces out of the way. Instead, bringing in a threat, but there's no real threat here because capture comes with check. And so now they're forced to move the king out of the way. So they move towards me, which isn't excellent, is it though? Because now I can capture that pawn, which now becomes an attack on that rook. And here I saw another potential fork ahead. And I thought, the pattern is that the opponent's doing sort of one move attacks. So very likely they're going to just move the rook, but that doesn't really do anything because now fork again with the knight on the king and bishop. And so when you fork a king as well, that's also known as, I think, an absolute fork. So they move the king out of the way, happy to liquidate. So let's whack that. They make a mistake, capture with the king. And the reason why that's a mistake is that now there is a skewer. So queen skewering the king to the other queen. King must move out of the way, must move out of check, which of course allows me to capture queen. That's fine, I'm trying to liquidate pieces. And now I've got, I can capture that pawn. Now, interestingly enough, I think, yeah. So Stockfish here reckons that queen move was a so-called mistake on the evaluation. But that's only because apparently if I capture that pawn straight up with the rook, there's a mate in 14. Now, there's no way I can see checkmate in 14 moves. So that's, I think, Stockfish, the algorithm, being a bit of a scumbag there, because there's no possible way any normal human, at least maybe some people can, but certainly not at my level. And I think a skewer here, trading queens when I'm so far ahead, +10 is a perfectly valid move. So there we go. Capture that hanging pawn now. They now sort of move the sort of knight. And again, this is where it's interesting. I think just the opponent doesn't have very many moves left. So a move that moves from -20 to -33 is it really excellent? I don't know. Here, another fork. So a fork between by the rook of the knight and potentially these pawns. So even if they move one of these pawns out of the way, at least one of them is going to be taken. So they move one pawn, I capture the other one. And of course, this knight is pinned to the king. They now push g5, which is fine, I suppose. Here I decided just to give a check. they move, probably to the wrong direction because now I capture the knight, also with check. And now they have to move the king out of the way, so king b3. Check with knight, they move out of the way. And here, I opted to give now a check with the pawn, and now king moves to a5, which I think it's forced. Now there's a potential mating net here, m5, so mate in 5. Again, I find it quite difficult to see these sort of mating nets that far ahead. I actually have sort of another potential fork here, another absolute fork, king and rook. I actually didn't see that at this point in the game. I thought, look, I'm not sure I like that hanging there, you know, very potentially. Is there something with the rook moving there? I don't know. At this point, I wasn't thinking too hard about the game. I thought, let's just neutralize that threat by just capturing. And that's what I did. King sort of moves back to that position. And here I thought, why not? It's forcing me to, it's just the good move here is so obvious, I suppose. So here's another fork of the king and rooks, another absolute fork. Allows me to capture the rook. Not very many pieces left. Interestingly enough, pretty much most of my pieces are protected. King moves out of the way. I move a pawn forward. I thought at this point it's probably easiest just to queen, you know, to promote, and it's probably easier than to just do a ladder mate or something. They move their pawn. Yep, let's just whack that. They move some random king moves. And I thought here, actually, I would prefer them to get rid of that bishop. It just removes the likelihood of getting a stalemate. And then with that queening, there's a nice open space to do a ladder mate. So queen, capture, now move, and basically here should be checkmate. And that's pretty much what happens. So a very interesting game, and obviously I think for my opponent it's one of these artifacts of them just joining the platform and being arbitrarily given a beginning sort of rating just automatically at that level. I wouldn't normally sort of play someone sort of, I suppose, with such a big rating difference or big skill difference, definitely on the chess.com platform, because I think in chess.com, if you sort of elect yourself as a beginner, I think you're automatically given a rating of 400 initially, rather than sort of all the way up to 1,000 or 1,200. But still, you know, I think it was a very useful reflection. You know, when I was beginning in chess, I made all the same mistakes, you know, not seeing the diagonals or one move threats, not being able to see sort of the knight moves. So we all have to start somewhere. I think, you know, kudos to this player for joining a platform and deciding to play chess, and I hope they have a very good, you know, sort of chess journey ahead of them. GG. Some insights from this game. I've mentioned quite a few times before that our visual biases tend to be such that we can miss threats along diagonals. So look explicitly at the diagonal attacking pieces, the bishop pair and the queen. My opponent made many moves which can be described as fairly superficial one-move attacks. It's critical to consider how your opponent is likely to respond to your threat in such a situation. Many of the forks in this game came as a result from the knight, the tricky, trappy knights. When I was earlier in my chess journey, I would often use the platform to mark out where the knights could go. You can do this with a right mouse click on squares to help me visualize potential traps. Over time, it becomes easier to recognize problems to avoid. And lastly, rather than immediately playing gambits as a beginner, it might be more solid to learn a basic opening first. For instance, the Italian, the Scotch, or maybe even the English openings. This can help you learn the basic principles of chess. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.